Ever wonder why you snap or just shut down with the person you love most? Today, we're diving into how trauma, big or small, can hijack your marriage, your relationship, and how one couple's courage to face their past changed virtually everything. Join us for a story of healing and hope. Up next on Master Your Marriage. Welcome to Master Your Marriage. I'm Robert and joined by my wonderful wife, Sharla. And today we're diving into a topic that we've been eager to explore, and it is how trauma, big or small, shapes our closest relationships. As we outlined this episode, it became clear to us that there was just too much to cover in one go. So we're launching another short series on how our past steers our present. If your marriage or intimate relationship isn't where you want it to be, often it's tied to unhealed wounds from your past.
So years ago, I came across a phrase that's guided my life. And that phrase is, there's always more to believe and perceive than what you currently believe and perceive. I think about it.
What does that mean?
All the time. That I don't always have the full picture of everything. There's always room to tweak or even change my perspective or a belief, maybe even change it completely.
Yeah.
And in working with couples and hearing your guys' stories, it helps to continually refine my beliefs, even my understanding of relationships and marriage. And one belief in particular that has transformed how I approach this work, it comes from the brilliant therapist, Terry Real. And it's this: when I'm talking to a couple, I'm always asking myself this question: which version of this person am I speaking to?
Ooh, that's a good one, right?
Is it their wise adult self that's guided by their prefrontal cortex, who is seeing this situation clearly? Or is it their triggered self that's driven by their limbic system and filtered through something in their past, maybe pain from their past or trauma from their past? So which version is it? Which version is talking to me? Which version is showing up in their home and in their relationships?
So you can't just ask them?
No.
No? It's like, hey, which one of you showing up?
like it's separate people.
Yeah.
Nope. Nope. But it's something that I'm always thinking in the back of my mind.
Yeah. This is the question that most of us, don't realize how important it is. We don't realize when we're operating from sort of our triggered self, our triggered place. We don't realize when the wounded child shows up. And when this wounded child is swinging a chain around, it's really just inflicting pain and on the ones that we love and the ones that we shouldn't be inflicting pain on.
That's right. But here's the good news. Once you can see it, once you sort of, I guess, bring it into the light, it's surprisingly simple to change.
Okay. Tell me if you can relate to this. You're in the middle of a stressful or heated moment with your spouse. Maybe they forgot something important or they said something that really hit a nerve. Suddenly you feel it. It's that righteous anger that's coursing through your veins like wildfire and you can't contain it. Before you know it, you're lashing out and forgetting that this is the person that you love most in the world. Or maybe you're the opposite. Maybe you feel all these emotions, but instead of exploding, you just shut down. Your throat tightens, words vanish, and you're just gone. Does this sound familiar?
It does.
Yeah. That, my friends, is what we call flipping your lid. It's your autonomic nervous system kicking into high gear and shoving you right in to fight or flight.
We've been there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, buddy.
We've been there. And if you're human, which I think you are, we're guessing that you've been there too.
Yeah, I think so.
And there's a reason why we use that term, flipping your lid, by the way. We're going to get into that in just a minute, where that phrase comes from.
Yeah. So those are the moments when you look back and you're asking yourself, like, who was that person? Why did that happen? Let's talk about what's happening in your brain during these moments. We're going to borrow a tool from Dr. Dan Siegel called the hand model of the brain. I want you to imagine this and do this with me.
So we're going to take our hand and we're going to hold it up with the palm open and facing away from you for just a minute.
Okay.
This is your brain if it were laid out flat, kind of like the globe. When it's laid out flat, it's kind of like a map, right?
Okay, got it.
So now fold your thumb across your palm. That thumb is right there. It's the heart of your brain's emotional center. Okay. It's your amygdala, your limbic system. Now wrap your top 4 fingers down over the thumb so that you're closing them down into a fist.
Okay.
Those fingers there, the 4 fingers, are the outer layers of your brain, the wrinkly part that you usually see in pictures. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And right behind your forehead here, right behind your forehead, under these fingers is we call this sometimes the upstairs brain or the prefrontal cortex. And this is the wise adult part of you. It's the smart part of you.
Pre-planning, cognition, all those things.
That makes the thoughtful decisions.
Yeah.
It stays calm and it says to your spouse, okay, I know we're having a challenge right now, but let's work through this together. We're in this together.
I'm a grown up. We can work through this together.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
That's right.
Now gently lift those 4 fingers and I want you to peek inside at your thumb and at your palm. That's the downstairs brain or the limbic system. This is where all your big emotions live. Fear, anger, sadness. It's all generated down here. And all the way down to your wrist is what we're going to call the brainstem. Its job is to keep your heart beating, the lungs moving in and out, no thinking required. As a matter of fact, your brainstem works without any input from anything else. It's the automated system.
And here's where it gets really interesting. That downstairs brain is a lifesaver in a crisis. So imagine you're hiking through Glacier National Park on a trail when suddenly a grizzly bear charges down the path at you. Your downstairs brain doesn't have to wait for permission. It just immediately screams, danger, danger. So your heart starts to pound, your muscles will tense up, you start to shorten your breath, and suddenly you are automatically ready to either run or to fight. That is your limbic system and your brain stem teaming up, this whole part down in here with your thumb, your palm, and your wrist area, that's your brainstem, all teaming up together. And it's doing that to keep you alive. But in your marriage, that same system can hijack you when there's no bear, just maybe a disagreement or a different way of seeing things, or maybe a hurt feeling.
So a hurt feeling can drive us into fight or flight.
Can hijack us.
Oh my goodness, that's terrible.
Behave just like a bear.
Normally, your upstairs brain, sort of this wise mentor, is keeping the downstairs brain in check. It's perched on top. It's sort of coordinating and balancing all of those big emotions. But when your life or maybe your spouse pushes your buttons, it's like you're hanging onto a cliff by your fingertips. Then you're gripping, trembling, trying to stay calm. And your upstairs brain is like whispering, saying, you've got this, buddy. Just hang on. But if the downstairs brain keeps firing and firing, it's like fight, flight, run. It's too much. And your grip looses and those fingers pop open. In 2 or 3 seconds, you've gone from reasonable, like you've got this, buddy, to you flipped your lid. You've lost it. Now you're in fight or flight. And
you're now reactive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that visual of just like hanging on to a cliff. I'm just hanging on. I've got it. And then all of a sudden you flip your lid and you lose that grip. Yeah. So let's talk about what your upstairs brain, that prefrontal cortex, let's talk about what it does when it is in the driver's seat. So when those fingers are closed down, what is its job? Because that is what makes your marriage work. When your lid is on, you can do a number of things that you can't do when the lid is flipped. Yeah. So let's talk about those.
So one of the first things you can do is regulate your body.
Yes.
The upstairs brain balances your sympathetic nervous system, which is sort of like the gas pedal.
Mm-hmm.
It balances against the parasympathetic system, which is sort of like the brake. Once those stay in balance, this is when your lid is on.
Correct. Okay. So another thing your prefrontal cortex is doing when the lid is closed is it helps you to be able to tune in to your partner. So if Robert is telling me about maybe a rough day that he has had, my upstairs brain allows me, so when my lid is closed, my upstairs brain allows me to be able to tune into him. I can have empathy for him. I can tune into that internal experience that he is having and be able to connect with the feelings that he's having, which is really just compassion, isn't it?
Absolutely. We do need empathy.
We need empathy. We need compassion. Can we do that with our lid?
No, empathy leaves the building.
Yeah. When our lid's open, the empathy leaves the building.
Empathy has left the chat.
That's right. Yeah. What else is our prefrontal cortex or our upstairs brain doing?
It probably helps regulate our emotions.
Yes.
Right. The upstairs brain keeps you from lashing out and then sort of regretting those decisions that you made when the downstairs brain was running the show.
That's right. And it also helps us find the pause. Robert and I talk a lot about finding the pause between stimulus and response.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
that space between whatever is triggering you, that stimulus, and then the reaction that follows. It slows it down so that we can find that pause. And your upstairs brain is what gives you choices in that pause. The upstairs brain says, look, here's this wide array of responses that you can choose from, and you can choose the best one. And that is something called response flexibility. It gives you the flexibility to choose your response.
I love response flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Instead of just one response, which is,
Yes, we
losing your
actually,
mind.
there might be 4, 5, 6, 100 choices when we have flexibility to choose one of those when the lid is closed.
I love that. This is what we need. We need more choices.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
In short, when your lid is on, you're living an us or a we consciousness, two people facing the world as a team together. But when you flip your lid, you slip into a me conscious, a me centric conscious, where I don't really think about anything other than what do I need in this instant, in this moment, self-protection, fight or flight.
That's right.
And here's the hard part. When you're in those moments, you forget that this is the person that I love most in the world. You are my entire world. And for some reason, when I move into fight or flight, I forget that.
Yes, you do.
I forget the sense of us. I forget the togetherness. That's gone.
That part has gone offline.
Yeah. So since we've taken it offline, we really just don't have access to that information, and we've lost the response decisions.
That's right. So where does trauma fit into all of this? Now, going back to that cliff analogy, if you imagine that you're clinging to that cliff that we talked about earlier, your fingers are gripping on tight and you can feel that limbic system firing, your lid's trying so hard to stay on, but it's about to lose it. Imagine someone comes over and they step on your grip. Now that person is standing there, it's much harder. It's much harder to hold on to the cliff. And that's what trauma does. The more pain that you carry from childhood or from your past relationships, whether it's big, obvious wounds, or whether it's the smaller, quieter ones that seem like maybe they weren't that big of a deal, whatever those things are, it causes your lid to flip faster. So, you might even be thinking, as I talk about this, you might be thinking, I didn't really have that much trauma. And maybe you did, and maybe you didn't. But here's what we've learned. It doesn't always take much to create triggers that show up in your marriage in some way.
Today, we're going to be diving into the big T, the larger trauma kind. This is the kind that most of us think about when we think of trauma. Next week, we'll explore the small T trauma and the subtler experiences that still impact us. To bring this to life, let me introduce you to Ethan and Lilly. Not their real names, but real clients who've graciously allowed us to share their story as Sharla worked with them. So Sharla's going to present the story and that experience as it came to them as she was working with this couple.
Yeah.
And I'm going to listen because I just love this story, and maybe I'll interject a couple.
Okay. Well, when Ethan and Lilly came to me a few months ago, I think it was about 25-year marriage was crumbling, and Lilly was ready to move out of the bedroom. She was feeling very unseen, unheard. She longed for Ethan to be present in their marriage. She wanted him to take the lead. She wanted him to show up for their marriage and to work on it. But at the same time, Lilly exhibited something we call negative sentiment override. And that's where she saw Ethan in the worst possible light, rarely giving him the benefit of the doubt. Everything that he did, she saw fault in it. Her words were often sharp. Her tone was quite cold, and it would have been easy to judge her as being controlling or harsh. But I kept asking myself that key question that we talked about earlier. What was it?
Who is showing up here?
Right. Which version of Lilly am I actually talking to right now? Who am I seeing in front of me? Ethan, on the other hand, he was a wreck. In our first session, he was sweating. He was struggling to find words. He was struggling to communicate. He was struggling to remember things. And it looked to me like he was teetering on the edge of maybe even having a panic attack. He was sweating so much. And he told me, he shared in our conversation that every day as he pulled into the driveway coming home from work, he would feel this knot, this physical pain. And he described it as feeling it in his core. And he asked me, he said, am I just afraid of her? Am I just afraid to come home? And he shared that he felt rejected, that he felt emasculated in their relationship. And he confessed that he had spent the majority of the last year really sad, feeling really sad.
And this is a terrible cascade, just to interject. I mean, you talk about how Lily was in negative sentiment override. So whatever Ethan did when he got home automatically was wrong.
Yeah.
And Ethan felt that energy and just didn't want to come home, because the minute he came home, he knew that it was going to be something that he did.
You can
real
see
or
how
imagined.
those two things would perpetuate the cycle.
Oh, man.
Right. And so in those first 2 sessions that we had together, we didn't get very far. The more that Lily kind of pushed for her needs, wanting connection, wanting attention, wanting to be able to work on their relationship, the more it actually overwhelmed Ethan. And you could see him kind of becoming more dysregulated and shrinking back. And you could see that it made him feel less than, unworthy. And it was really this vicious cycle, like you just pointed out. She was pursuing, he was withdrawing. So as I watched them, I noticed 2 emotions that were swirling in the room. So Lily seemed like she was dodging sadness.
Really?
Like it seemed like she really was trying to step away from it, like it was poison. And she would flip it immediately into anger or harshness or coldness. And there was something else that really struck me. There was a big, I don't know, hard to explain, kind of an unspoken weight that was just hanging there that wasn't being said. And I couldn't quite figure it out. So after my second session with them, I asked Lily to meet with me one-on-one in a private session. And there she was able to open up and share some things with me. And she admitted to me that I thought was really interesting, that she struggled. She struggled to be gentle and compassionate with Ethan. She found compassion was easy with coworkers, with friends, with other family members, even strangers. But when it came to Ethan, she couldn't feel it for him.
Did she feel like she had that sort of compassion with him early on in their relationship?
I think so, but I think she'd forgotten about it, or in that negative sentiment override. I think that she had a little bit rewritten their past stories and looked at all of the stories in the past through that negative lens.
I think you mentioned this as you told the story, as you shared this with me, that either one of them might have reflected that there really wasn't any good events that had happened in the marriage.
Yeah. At this particular point in our sessions, they didn't really have a very positive spin on their past.
Right.
They looked at it through a negative light. That does change later. But it was interesting at that point, because of the negative sentiment override, how the memories had been tainted even.
Right. Okay.
So in this session, I'm now working with her privately and talking about how she couldn't feel that compassion for him. And I started asking her about this pattern I noticed with her turning sadness into anger. And I could now pick up that we were getting closer to something that was that unspoken weight. And so to dig in deeper, I used this technique called timeline therapy. And that's when Lily said that at age 5, she had been sexually violated. And she had never shared that with anyone, not with Ethan, not with a family member, not with a friend, not with a single soul.
Wow.
So it was, I'm grateful that she shared that with me. And I was the first person that she'd ever been able to feel comfortable telling that to. And the reason why I think that was, to her, speaking that out loud would have made her feel like a victim. It would have made her feel weak. It would have made her feel powerless. See, by the time she got to about age 12, she had built a coping mechanism to be able to deal with her hurt. And she learned through this coping mechanism to transform her sadness into anger, into control, as a way to kind of create an armor for herself. And that armor actually, in many ways, did make her strong. It made her ambitious. It made her organized. It made her a powerhouse in many ways in her life. It helped her to survive. And I want to hone in on that a little bit. It was actually necessary. Yeah. That coping strategy was necessary for her and probably did help her to survive.
But sometimes coping strategies can then expand and move into other areas of your life.
Yes, we're going to get into that.
Right. And so if this is the point, I think we're about to meet Lily's adaptive child.
Yes.
This version of her that has shown up with this coping mechanism and is wreaking havoc on her relationship.
That's right. Yeah. And the term adaptive child is a term that we borrowed from the brilliant therapist Pia Mellody. And the adaptive child is kind of like a kid in adult's clothing. It's the part of all of us in some way, shape, or form. And in Lily's case, it was the part of her that had to adapt to a certain childhood pain in order to keep her safe. So for Lily, her adaptive child was created at around age 12. And it stepped in to protect that wounded 5-year-old who was carrying that trauma.
And it's awesome to think that she sort of created this adaptive child. I mean, we all have our own adaptive child that comes out when we're triggered or when we have trauma or any of those situations. And I love Pia Mellody's work in regards to the adaptive child. And it was amazing how it did it. But I think the important part here is that it was still an adaptive child, not an adaptive adult. And at 5 or at 12, a 12-year-old still is not going to see things as mature as an adult is.
That's right. That 12-year-old's anger and control would have been lifesavers back then.
Right.
As a 12-year-old. It would have helped her to be able to navigate a world that felt really unsafe. But as you just said a moment ago, what is adaptive as a child actually becomes maladaptive as an adult.
Yeah.
It might have worked back then, protected her, kept her safe, but as an adult in her marriage, not so much. And at 50, Lily's 12-year-old adaptive child was actually running the show in her marriage. So whenever something sad would happen or disappointing would happen, or when she felt vulnerable in some way,
switch it out to anger.
She would switch it to anger.
Oh, wow.
Her 12-year-old would take over. Her 12-year-old would give her just enough harshness to be able to feel safe, back in control. And in control. And in control.
Yeah, because that had to be terrifying as she moves forward. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And that 12-year-old, right, the problem with that 12-year-old doesn't have a prefrontal cortex.
Not a well-developed one. Yeah.
Right. It doesn't have a well-developed lid. So therefore, it doesn't have great relational skills. It doesn't have that we, us consciousness. Her only mission, this 12-year-old's only mission, when it would show up in the marriage, was self-protection. It was essentially sounding a false alarm that Ethan was the threat. So what happened next? So through timeline therapy, Lily was able to begin to heal. We did some inner child work together. And in that I love inner child work because it allows us to be able to sort of tenderly but firmly communicate to our younger self. She was able to communicate first to her 5-year-old self, who carried that sadness and that hurt. And then she was able to communicate to the 12-year-old who worked really hard to protect her and was able to thank her for that 12-year-old, thank that 12-year-old for that. And yet at the same time, with love and with firmness, she told her 12-year-old, look, I'm grateful for you. You saved me. Thank you. But I'm in charge now.
Time to take a seat.
Time to let the grown-ups be in charge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, thank you, but I don't need you to run my marriage. Yeah. Ethan is not the threat that you think that he is. I've got this. I've got us.
Wow. Okay. So let's bring this back to the big question. Which version of me is showing up in my marriage?
That's right.
Right. Is this version of me my wise adult self, tapping into this smart and well-adapted prefrontal cortex, seeing my partner clearly, trying to stay connected, looking for lots of decision points before I lose the reason.
And finding flexibility.
Or am I this triggered younger part of me, my adaptive child who's wounded? I'm reactive. I'm flipping back and forth. I'm losing that precious, super precious sense of us. So when you start asking these questions, something shifts. You begin to see the patterns in these moments in your life where your past may have sort of crept in and shown up in the present. And here's the beautiful part. Once you can name the problem, identify it and name the problem, then you can begin to change and heal that part of you, maybe even faster than you could have imagined.
It's actually shocking. So let me finish the story with Lily. So Lily was able to see that pattern, see how her 5-year-old was her sadness, her 12-year-old was her anger, how her 12-year-old was stepping in to rescue her 5-year-old. And once she saw that, change was really fast. And it started with her courage. So I encouraged her to go to Ethan and to tell him, because she had never told him.
It's just
about her
amazing
past.
that she had never, not only not ever told anyone, but she hadn't shared that with her husband.
Right.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of vulnerability, which was hard for her to do.
Right. Because the 12-year-old keeps saying like,
doesn't let the vulnerability in.
right.
And
Okay.
anyway, so she went to him and she shared with him. And that night they stayed up for 8 hours talking through, truth and tears. And I love, and I get this from Terry Real as well. Like when we start to see change happen, it's when we are able to join through the truth. And so she opened up to him about her 5-year-old, about the weight of that sexual trauma that she'd kept secret for nearly 3 decades. And she introduced him to her 12-year-old adoptive child who was her fierce protector. And for the first time, she let him see behind the curtain why she acted with such harshness. And he was able to understand where it was coming from.
What did he think about all of that?
I think he said to me, I wish I could have been the person who she felt safe sharing that with.
Yeah. As soon as you told me she hadn't told anyone, I knew from the husband's role, I was like, oh man, I wish I would have been in a place where I had exuded enough trust and safety to you that you might have been able to share that with me.
Right. So, and at the same time, also super grateful that he could now understand. So even though he wished he could have been there, he also could now see it.
Yeah.
He was able to understand her behavior.
Isn't that awesome that Ethan in this example was able to maybe just bring his adult self to the conversation enough to not, to get past sort of the hurt.
Yeah.
But to bring his adult self, his non-adaptive child self to the conversation with her and find the compassion and understanding.
I love what you said about him bringing his adult self to that conversation, because you're right. His adaptive child before would have done what? It would have run away.
Yeah.
It would have withdrawn. It would have felt overwhelmed. Yeah. It would have tried to escape the situation. So you're right. He was able to stay in it. And then he was able to, in this 8-hour conversation, also, rather than retreat, he was able to also share with her how the feelings that he had been carrying all these years of being rejected, being afraid of her, of being sad. And so that required Lily to be able to stay in her adult self.
Yeah, the 12-year-old's not going to sit there for 8 hours.
And it was amazing that she didn't flip her lid at that point when he started to share those things.
Absolutely.
She was able to listen, and she was just able to let his words land. And so this moment, this joining of truth, it wasn't exactly a magic fix that fixed everything in an instant, but honestly, it was really close. And it was the beginning of being able to rebuild something different. And then in the sessions that followed, I watched that transformation continue. Ethan, like I said, he was able to understand her very different. The forgiveness wasn't immediate, but it did come. And, in the meantime, while he was working on forgiveness, Lily just kept promising to show up as her wise adult self and promised him that she would be in that with him, however long it took for him to find forgiveness.
Oh man.
And
such a cool story.
It was an amazing story. They're like my favorite people. I love them. They're one of my favorite clients. And I'm so grateful that they let me share this story because it's so powerful. And I've since followed up with them. We still have a couple more sessions that we're still doing together. And they've both just talked about how communication is so much better, and emotional intimacy, physical intimacy is incredible, that they're laughing, they're playing. There was this one point, and I love this part of this story. There was this one point where Ethan got really emotional, and all it took was Lily just looking at him, and all she did was smile. And it was the way in which she was looking at him that he could tell that she loved him, and that he knew that she felt his love. And he said, I saw that smile on her face and I just cried because I could feel it again. I could feel that connection and that closeness again.
So didn't they, and I know you're probably going to get to this, but didn't they tell you later that sort of was the unlock code for her to re-examine their entire relationship and start to remember that they really did have a great marriage?
this is going back to what you asked earlier about the past and how we look at the past and how that negative sentiment override filters not just the present and how we look at our partner, but it also clouds our past memories.
Yeah.
And so she told me later on, she said, I realized there was a lot of good. There was a lot of good in our past, more than I remembered. And now I can see it.
And think about how important that is, when you're stuck in this cycle of negative sentiment override and you look at your marriage and you're like, I don't even know why I'm married to you. This whole thing has just been a disaster from the go. Mm-hmm. And then to be able to move into your wise adult self, both of you, and look back at this beautiful marriage and relationship that you've created, that it's like a rolling hill with mountains, and you've climbed the mountains, which are not easy by any stretch of the imagination, right. But you climbed it and you saw the view and you came down and you took advantage of the downhill. And all the beauty that was in there. But when there's beauty, there's also a little bit of rugged, but be able to see the beauty instead of the rugged effort is an amazing
so
part.
much joy when you can look back at your past and see the good, the bad, the learnings, and then you have that joy of what you've been through together.
Yeah, I love that.
And they were able to restore that. And that doesn't mean that they weren't ever going to disagree again. That doesn't mean that they're never going to fight again. And they've learned that. They've learned that when those disagreements do come up, as they do for all of us, including us, Lily has learned how to take a breath. She's learned how to pause and to use that prefrontal cortex, that pause that we get there, to be able to come up with choices.
Yeah, absolutely.
That flexibility. And okay, I need to get back into my wise adult self. I can feel my 12-year-old wanting to come back in, and I can choose something different. And Ethan has had to learn, not to shut down, but to stay present. And he's done so amazing at just staying in it and listening. They had to learn to trust each other's wise adult selves to show up. I think that's so important. I can trust you to recruit your higher self, your adult self, and you can trust me to do the same, because that's what it's all about. When the wise adult stays in charge, we are relational. We are able to hold on to that very important us consciousness, even when things are hard, even when the conversation's tough.
So that old adage, kids, the adults want to have a conversation. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's something we say to each other so that I can tell your adaptive child and you can tell my adaptive child like,
I love you, but the adults are speaking.
Doing a great job, but the grownups need to talk right now.
Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome. So Ethan and Lily's story shows us what's possible when we face our trauma and then choose healing. As always, if today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear from you. So come on over and find us on Instagram at Master Your Marriage. Also, if you found this episode helpful, please leave us a 5-star review and share it with someone who might benefit. And if you have any suggestions for future topics or things that you'd like us to tackle, please email us at masteryourmarriage@gmail.com. As always, be kind to each other this week. Put each other first. Remember, it's the small things done often that create the biggest impact.
Until next time.